Welcome to this lesson on Spring Social and how we're going to use Spring Social to integrate with some social networking sites. So the phrase social networking often refers to efforts aimed at bringing people together in the software world. Those efforts take the form of online social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are going to, in this lesson and the ones to follow, talk about what Spring Social is and how we can use to integrate with Facebook and Twitter into our Running for Brews application. So we wouldn't be doing this any justice if we didn't start to talk about OAuth and OAuth 2 and kind of what it is and how this plays into Spring Social. So first off, OAuth is an authorization framework that enables applications to obtain limited access to user accounts on HTTP services such as Facebook, GitHub, and LinkedIn. It's important to note that it is an authorization framework and not an authentication framework. We aren't asking Facebook if you're allowed to log into Running for Brews. We're asking Facebook, hey, you already have information about this user. We would like some access to it. So it's important to note the difference there. And the way that this works is it works by delegating user authentication to the service that hosts the user account and authorizing third-party applications such as ours to access that user account. OAuth 2 provides authorization flows for web desktop applications and mobile devices as well. So the whole point of this is to access data in a third-party API such as Facebook or Twitter. And so let's talk about how this works real quick. So when we get to the Running for Brews application, we have the option to log in. Now I don't currently have a login for the application, so I have some options. One, I could register for an account with Running for Brews, and then I can use that account to log in. Now, some people get really tired of giving their user information to just every web application out there. And so I'm sure you've come across this before where you can use some type of social login. So what it does is we would click on a social icon button such as Facebook. We would be taken over to Facebook. Facebook then says, all right, Running for Brews is asking for permission to access the following data. We would want like your profile information, who you are, so first name and last name, and we would want your email address. And not in our Running for Brews application, but in other cases, you might want to be able to get a list of friends or be able to post to their wall, or etc. So any permissions you're asking for will then be displayed there. Then if you're okay with those permissions, you're going to say, allow Running for Brews to access my information. At that point, it'll take you back to the application and then go ahead and log you in. Now in our JHipster application, we actually write a few records in the database, one of which is in our social profile table. So we keep a record of who you are, what provider you came from, such as Facebook, and then we store that authentication token that is used to talk to Facebook and get information from. So once we have that, we also write another record into the actual user table so that we know that you're a user, and that's how we kind of log you in. So that's a little bit about how it works. The other thing that comes into play with OAuth is there are many flavors of OAuth. And there's OAuth 1, there's OAuth 2, there's 4 or 5 different flavors of OAuth 2 around. And different providers use different OAuth flavors. So this can be really difficult when you're trying to roll your own integrations. And so I suggest you don't try doing this yourself, and that's why we're lucky to have a project like Spring Social where we don't really need to understand what is happening underneath the hood. So that helps out a lot. Okay, so what is Spring Social then? The project is out on the spring.io website. I suggest you take a look at it. And basically Spring Social is made up of a Spring Social core, which is the framework for creating the connections between a Spring application and an API. We also get the individual providers like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. And we talked about this on the last slide, but there are so many different flavors of OAuth, we don't have to worry about that. Each of these providers could potentially be using different versions of OAuth, but thankfully for us, we don't worry about that. Each of these providers go ahead and hide the implementation for us. Also, if you look on that website, there are a ton of community projects. So if you want to integrate with something, I would look there first. There's just a ton of projects. As far as JHipster goes, there's a little bit more work involved if you're not using one of the main ones, but to be honest, it's not a lot and it's pretty easy to take care of. And it's not just for social. There are other projects out there like, I don't really consider GitHub and Bitbucket social platforms. I mean, yes, you can go on and look at a profile of me and see all of my GitHub repositories, but that's not really what it is. But this Spring Social, I think I heard one of the project leads say it once, is more of a Spring Connect. It allows you to connect to different platforms. And so we can use it to connect to other things like GitHub or Bitbucket. So let's talk about what we need as far as JHipster requirements if we want to go ahead and use it in JHipster. First, we need to make sure that we're on 2.23 or above. At the time of this recording, we're on 4 something. So as long as you're using something recent, you should be good to go. And then we also need to make sure that when we create our application, there's a section that talks about security and what type of security do you want to use. And we actually want to use HTTP session authentication with social login enabled. So those are a couple requirements there as well. Warning, this doesn't support with Cassandra at the time of this recording. And again, I mentioned it, if you're going to use anything outside of Google, Facebook, and Twitter, there might be a little bit more configuring for you. I'm going to go ahead and add a link to that document, but again, it kind of walks you step by step. There's just a few things you need to add in code, and then there's a couple of properties that you're going to need to add to your configuration files, but it isn't anything that crazy because core Spring Social core handles the communication, whereas you just need individual implementations for each of the connectors. So that should be pretty easy to get started. So I think we'll leave it at that. That's kind of an overview of what Spring Social is. And in the next couple lessons, we'll start to build out our application. We're going to connect to Facebook in one, we're going to connect to Twitter in another, and we'll show you how all of that works. So with that, let's jump on in.